My older sister convinced me that my nose made me ugly. She repeated it so many times over the years that I believed her. And when I finally saved up the money for surgery, working nights and cutting corners on everything, she just stole it. Quietly, slyly, without a shred of shame. If I'm being honest, I was beautiful. That's not narcissism. It's just a fact everyone could see. Except me. I'm 17, living in the suburbs where backyards smell like barbecue on weekends, and the school parking lots are crammed with someone's mom's sedans. I was on my way to graduation, to college, to a portfolio where every design was like a little bridge across a raging river of self-doubt. But somewhere between childhood birthday parties and my first part-time jobs, a strange script got written into my head. My nose was too noticeable, which meant I was not enough. And my sister was the author of that script. She knew how to speak in a way that even the silence inside me would agree with her. She was one of those dazzling people with an Instagram-perfect life, with attention strung around her like decorative lights, and a rock-solid belief that the center of the universe was right in line with her front-facing camera. She was adored by crowds, stories, and parties. She was not adored by work. In our family, everything was ordinary, almost boring. Office job parents, endless traffic jams, planned Saturday grocery runs, neighbors who knew our dog's name better than my middle name. I was the middle daughter, the one who didn't ask for much and slipped away to her room when the house got too loud. The youngest was a little human-cat hybrid, always wrapped in a blanket. The oldest, my sister, was her own kind of weather, the sort that made you need both an umbrella and sunglasses at the same time. I wanted simple things. To get into architecture school, to see cities as texts instead of just scenery, to prove to myself that I could build not only houses, but myself. And yes, I wanted to fix my nose. Back then, I didn't yet realize it's easier to change your programming than your plastic. I found an online side job in advertising design. Quiet nights and clients who paid fairly kept me afloat. I made covers for local cafes, icon packs for apps, simple landing pages for startups often run by 2 people and a cat. Sometimes morning would find me with coffee spilled over my keyboard and dark shadows under my eyes. But I was stubborn. I had goals. And goals are alarm clocks that don't know the meaning of politeness. I saved for the surgery slowly and without sentiment. In a spreadsheet, line by line, without rounding. When the amount finally stopped feeling like a myth, I allowed myself for the first time to dream with a specific date. I knew exactly what I was going to do. Start college with a new face, heal the bruises over the summer, and see a different profile in the mirror. Strangely, it wasn't the thought of a smaller nose that warmed me most. It was the fact that I had kept a promise to myself, like a ballerina holding the bar for the first time without falling. And then one morning, still in my pajamas, I opened my banking app and saw a minus. Not a neat, polite minus. A minus with personality, as if someone had pulled the plug on my piggy bank and said, "Funny, isn't it?" The transaction list flaunted tickets for an overseas flight, a hotel with a pool, restaurants with names my wallet was never meant to pronounce. I sat on the edge of my bed, feeling an icy ball grow under my ribs. The foundation of my future house cracked inside me. And that crack had a name. My older sister. I don't like starting conflicts, but I know how to finish them. That day, my quiet kindness stood up and walked out of the room, closing the door behind her, and I was left alone with a new version of myself, one that wasn't afraid to be tough. I knew exactly how she'd gotten access. I'd seen her phone linger suspiciously near my bank card on the kitchen counter a couple of weeks earlier. One snapshot, a couple of taps, and just like that, my night shifts had paid for someone else's tropical beach. I didn't go to her with accusations. I went to our parents. I had screenshots of the transactions, a detailed timeline, and that cold, steady calm that takes over when you don't want explanations. You want results. I laid out the entire scheme. I was the ATM with a self-service system, and she was the girl with bottomless pockets for new experiences. I added something I usually keep to myself. The exhaustion of always being the middle child who has to take care of herself emotionally. I didn't yell. I simply, as if defending a project, presented all the numbers and consequences. including the potential police report, account freeze, ruined credit history, and my stolen chance at the surgery my own hardworking back had promised me. The loudest moment in the house was when my parents finally stopped looking past me and started looking at me. They didn't see a little girl to pat on the head and send to her room. They saw a person with a plan. I proposed the only fair scenario. My sister takes out a loan in her own name and pays back every cent into my account, plus interest, plus the bank's fee, which I'd leave for her future adult conscience to process. I told them I was ready to go all the way. I had my phone in hand, the bank's number already on the screen, along with the phrase disputed transaction, ready to turn into a criminal case if needed. I didn't want her in jail. I wanted my architecture back. My sister, of course, put on a performance using her oldest tricks. Not a single tear left a mark on me. I looked at her like she was just a problem to solve in a few steps. Admission, repayment, new responsibility. That day, I realized my voice didn't have to be loud to carry weight. My parents saw I wasn't joking. For the first time in a long while, they took my side, not because it was the family right thing to do, but because it was too intimidating to argue with how firmly I stood my ground. My mom called the bank, my dad opened his laptop, and adulthood walked into our house in the form of reports, forms, and consultations. I told them I'd give them until evening to decide. I knew that authority grows stronger when there's a deadline. By evening, we had a plan. My sister, accompanied by our parents, would take out a personal loan. She'd transfer my money back to my account in full. She'd pay off her debt over the next 2 years, on her own, without begging, whining, or scheming. Her friends, the ones she had whisked away to the beach with my money, weren't going to help. That much was obvious from her pale face and the short, clipped words I overheard from the other room, like the rustle of paper. Female friendship is a delicate thing, but not always durable, especially when someone else's wallet is involved. In the end, my sister signed the papers, and when the money landed back in my account, I felt both strangely empty and incredibly free. Empty, because a childish chapter in my life had ended. Free, because I had finally drawn my boundaries. After that, the house grew a little quieter. My sister walked around like someone carrying a backpack full of rocks, counting her spending for the first time in her life. Her friends left her a few likes on old photos and vanished, like water into sand. My parents looked at me like I was a grown daughter they didn't quite know, but who could handle things. I gave myself a day to breathe, then another to work. I returned to my usual rhythm: school, portfolio, late-night design projects. I reopened the surgeon's page. The surgery date was on the horizon, like a legal new life. But by then, I felt something different. I had become more beautiful without ever stepping into an operating room. Strange and a little dangerous to admit out loud, after spending a whole year trying to prove the opposite. And still, I went to the consultation. This wasn't about fixing flaws in my habits or chasing someone else's opinion. This was about control. I went to the surgeon the way an architect goes to a restorer, with blueprints, inspiration, and a clear task. He turned out to be younger than I'd expected, with precise hands and an attentive gaze. I had all my questions ready. I knew about recovery time, swelling, and contraindications. But he listened and studied my profile as if checking to make sure no important detail had been lost along the way. Something clicked quietly in my chest again, as if it was still possible to build everything differently. What surprised me most was how effortlessly he turned my carefully planned project upside down. No tricks, no hypnosis, just numbers, proportions, my height, my cheekbones, my genetics. He explained that reducing my nose wouldn't save me, because there was nothing to be saved from. He showed me how the light fell across the bridge, how my eyes and lips balanced each other, how my nose wasn't a flaw but part of the rhythm. And at some point, I realized I was listening the way I would to a lecture on urban design. Only instead of facades, it was my own face. I left his office without scheduling the surgery. I left with my nose, and with the feeling that for the first time I was truly defending what was mine. No one had tried to talk me into loving myself. He had simply shown me that it was already beautiful, and that what had been controlling me wasn't the mirror, but a voice someone else had recorded in my head years ago. My sister spent a long time paying off that loan. Each week became more carefully managed than the contents of her purse. She learned to tell herself no, because now the bank was telling her the same thing. The friends she'd bought a summer for with my money didn't remember the debt. They were too busy. Later, someday, never. The lesson wasn't mine. It was hers. For the first time, she texted me something short and stripped of sugarcoating, the kind that puts a period exactly where it should. I saw her growing up too, but in a different way. Not from a world of forgiveness and soft carpets, but along a narrow path strung between obligation and shame. Sometimes the best teacher in life is the interest rate on a loan. I started noticing something strange and almost funny. The moment I stopped feeling like I had to fix my face, I became more beautiful. My sleep got deeper. Food tasted better. Makeup became lighter. I went to the library more often, sketched buildings, traced the lines of old theaters and train stations, as if I were learning to speak the city's own language. I kept my savings for college. Now every number in my spreadsheet meant not a surgery, but freedom. A trip to an architecture exhibition, a new laptop, a course on parametric design. The money was back where it belonged, but more importantly, I was back where I belonged. And the surgeon. This is the part where I could spin it into some story about fate and serendipity. But the truth is simpler. He invited me to come back for a follow-up. Not as a patient, but as someone who might enjoy another couple of lectures on harmony and proportions. We started meeting up sometimes after his shifts, always at the same little cafe that smelled of cinnamon. I'd listen to him talk about subtle differences in tissue types, and he'd listen to me explain how engineering logic holds the beauty of a building in place. Like music and math had been best friends since childhood, but had simply forgotten where they used to meet. Yes, he was single. I could tell from his neatly uncluttered schedule, from the way he could easily change his plans for the sake of a good cup of coffee. What we had was good, gentle, but full of promise. I didn't give it the word people write in song titles with capital letters. I simply walked home with a light smile, catching myself in the act of loving my profile in the reflection of shop windows. For the first time, I felt like an autonomous system. I stopped being an interface for other people's wants, even when those wants came from family. When my sister took out that loan, my world didn't suddenly have more justice. It had more order. I didn't destroy her life. I reclaimed my own. That was scary, because it broke the role I was used to playing. But it turned out the role of the middle child can be stronger than the role of the favorite or the troubled one, if it's built on honesty. I chose to be kind on purpose, not out of habit. And knowing that, if necessary, I could be tough. Even ruthless didn't make me worse. It made me calmer. It's like having a fire extinguisher at home. No one feels better because it's there until there's a fire. Intrigue and unexpected turns, the very twists I usually can't stand in TV dramas, turned out to be bittersweet in real life. I had planned to lie down on an operating table, but instead I stood taller at my own desk. I had prepared to change an outward angle, but in the end, I changed an inward one. I'd wanted my parents to finally look at me, but now I'd learned to look at myself without anyone's permission. And yes, I'll admit, having a young, handsome surgeon in the picture is a gift from fate too. But he's not the main thing. The main thing is that I finally stopped agreeing to scripts written for me by someone else. I sometimes think back to the night I first opened my savings spreadsheet. I remember the numbers the way I'd remember the train car numbers taking me to the right city. I remember the glow of the lamp, the quiet hum of the heater. I remember my hands trembling by morning from coffee and satisfaction. And when the money disappeared, it was almost like losing a train ticket when the tracks were already laid out in your head. But now I know. If the ticket's gone, you can still get there on foot. If the path is yours. The only thing that matters is stopping the people who pick pockets in the crowd. And even more important, never giving them the keys to your heart. Maybe it sounds dramatic, but I see photographs differently now. I used to hide from the camera. Now I look straight into the lens and see the city behind me, the people around me, and my nose, which for some reason does me a special favor. It grounds me. It's like a tower in an old neighborhood, the kind someone might want to tear down for the sake of symmetry, only to realize that it's the very thing that makes the place recognizable and loved. Architecture works like that sometimes. You leave an imperfection and suddenly it becomes the landmark. I don't know what will happen next with the surgeon. Maybe this is just a beautiful chapter that will have its own ending. Or maybe it's an arch we'll walk through into a new street. But I do know one thing for sure. When I step into that street, it will be on my own, without trying to be anyone's copy. Sometimes I imagine telling all of this to my students, if I ever end up on the other side of the classroom. I'll tell them how important it is to distinguish between edits in a project and edits in yourself. I'll explain that restoration isn't about returning to an earlier version. It's about taking care of what has stood the test of time. I'll probably mention the story with the loan, and how sometimes the most important lectures aren't given by people but by circumstances. And maybe someone in that room will realize that their nose is a tower too, and towers rarely need to be torn down, unless they stand in the way of building bridges. I'm still that quiet girl who doesn't like drama. I still love honesty, fairness, and being left alone when I'm working on my blueprints. But now I know the value of my peace. I don't tear down houses unless they're truly falling apart. I don't tolerate strangers' tents pitched on my land. And if someone decides my silence is an invitation, I'll show them that deep inside this quiet, there's a solid metal door. It only opens from the inside. And from now on, the key is mine. And yes, the most important thing. This story isn't about surgery, money, or someone else's likes. It's about the moment I stopped being someone else's project. And about how, as it turns out, my nose had been the perfect blueprint all along.